Planning Commission meeting for Monday, February 5th will come to order. Aaron, would you please lead us in the pledge of a flag?
Sure.
We stand. Place your hand over your heart.
Repeat with me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we get started this evening, just a few housekeeping items. Those have put in forms to speak on items on the agenda. We're going to limit it to 3 minutes tonight. So please keep your points clear and to the point. If somebody gets up and makes a comment about that's very, very, very similar to what you just said, maybe we can let it pass so we can get more speakers up here that might have a different take. The last meeting we had this size, I was called the Kremlin, quote unquote. So maybe if we can keep the personal attacks to a minimum, that'd be really sweet. And at this point, if there's, we have one speaker that, anybody who would like to speak on items that are not on the agenda this evening, you are welcome to come forward. And I have one person that would like to speak, not related to point or A or B on our minutes. So is Lansing here? State your name. You have 3 minutes.
Okay. Good evening, Commissioners. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you. My name is Lansing Duncan. I've been a Solvang resident for 11 years, a Valley resident for almost 30 years. I served as the Santa Barbara County Planning Commissioner for the 3rd District for more than 5 years, and as the chairman of the General Plan Advisory Committee that worked on developing the Santa Ynez Valley Community Plan. Every institution benefits from public feedback, and so I'm here to give you a little public feedback. I'd like to talk to you about the Valley Plaza Mercantile Shopping Center at the corner of Alamo Pintado Road and Mission Drive. Unfortunately, what we can see now does not fit. And it is just half of the shopping center. Just stand at Jim's gas station or at Union Bank and look at the out-of-scale structures that have been erected so far. There appears to have been no consideration for the fact that the Valley Plaza corner of the intersection is elevated above the other 3 corners. That should have suggested lower development on that site, not dramatically higher, in order to be compatible with the surroundings. The First Bank building would be a handsome structure if it were located on an appropriate site, but it doesn't fit here. It's much bigger, taller, and bulkier than the building it replaced, and it's jammed into the corner of Alamo Pintado and Old Mission. In your defense, it is built 10 feet closer to Alamo Pintado and closer to Old Mission than the drawings you saw. How did this happen? How was this approved? Why didn't the project come back to you so you could reduce its size if it had to be placed so poorly? Of course, there's a reason the First Bank building is so big. It's an attempt to make the gigantic, bulky New Frontiers building appear an appropriate scale. No way. Neighbors on Old Mission call that building the prison. This development is a gigantic mistake, especially considering its location at a primary gateway protected by city policies, and the fact that the existing shopping center showed how appropriate development could fit this constrained slope site, be compatible with residential and commercial neighbors, enhance Solvang's gateway with a forest of trees, and not detract from the importance of the village. As a resident, a neighbor, and a former planner, what this tells me is that the city can't be depended upon to assure appropriate development, protects its neighborhoods and its gateways, and recognize when it has a good thing. So I hope you will take this in the sense of constructive criticism, with the idea that if we mutually decide these are goals we want to work toward to, that it would be in the best interest of all to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Lansing. Also, at this time, anyone else like to speak about anything that's not on the agenda this evening? Okay. Any requests for continuance, withdrawals, or addition of ex-agenda items?
No.
Did you have anything? Okay. Any conflicts or ex-party communications?
I just want to disclose I did hear from a number of people, several of whom are here, who had questions about the agenda item 2A.
Would somebody make a motion to approve the minutes if everybody's satisfied with them?
Move approval of the minutes of the December 4th, 2017 hearing.
Correct.
I'll second.
Say, all in favor, say aye.
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 Okay. Minutes are approved. At this time, before we start, there are two items on the agenda this evening. We have the Verizon wireless tower, and we have the annexation study. I got a feeling the Verizon tower is not going to be as quick as the annexation study, so if Verizon's here now and would like to go first, please do so. Thank you. We can do a staff report first on that, Holly?
Yes,
Are you prepared to do that?
yes, I'm prepared to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, the applicant is here, and we will be reversing the order of the items tonight. So we will be hearing the Verizon wireless rooftop facility CUP application at 1684 Copenhagen Drive. This application was filed by Aaron DeLau for Verizon Wireless to consider the approval of a conditional use permit to construct a new rooftop wireless small cell site, which includes 2 antennas and 4 remote radio units, located inside a faux chimney structure located on the rooftop of an existing restaurant. This restaurant's in the TRC zone district. It's the Red Viking restaurant. And Planning Commission is requested to consider a categorical exemption for the CEQA action. The recommendation tonight is to make the required findings for approval of the projects specified in Attachment A of the staff report, adopt a Resolution 1802, and approve the conditional use of permit subject to conditions of approval included as Attachment B, and accept the categorical exemption or refer back to staff if it's applicable. The project description has been given you. The plans have been submitted. I think you've all had a chance to review them. The history of this conditional use permit was that they applied on January 18th, 2017, and after discussion and resubmittals, the application was deemed complete on October 24th of 2017. City of Solvang discovered a discrepancy in the RF emissions report. That was part of the delay in resubmittal, and the report had been revised. We also, during that time, adopted ordinance pertaining to wireless telecommunication facilities, and this particular project meets the requirements under that new ordinance. The BAR previously approved similar designs using a rooftop faux screening elements in the TRC. I think you all may be aware of a few of them, including a project at 1693 Mission in 2014. There is no exterior lighting. An alternative sites analysis report was submitted also, and it's in your staff report as to those considerations. And in terms of the health and safety, based on the conclusion of the RF report prepared by Hammett and Edison, the telecommunication facility will comply with the prevailing standards for limiting public exposure to radio frequency energy, and therefore will not, for this reason, cause a significant impact on the environment. Some general plan consistency findings were made. That's part of the conditional use permit. And there was no development review committee meeting that was held due to the minor nature of this project. They will be going to BAR for the aesthetics this week, correct? Yes. There is an appeals procedure, and that is outlined in our municipal code. So with that, that concludes my staff report. I'm available to answer any questions, and the applicant is also here to answer questions. Thank
Commissioners have questions of Holly or staff on this?
No questions.
I do. I have one. I'm not sure that it was addressed in the staff report, but were there any co-location opportunities other than building a separate facility here?
When that was asked, there was not a compatibility that was allowed with that particular technology. I think that co-location works with a larger antenna site, and this was considered too small for that.
Okay.
The applicant is here, though, to answer that question more specifically if she requests. Would you like to? Yeah, this is Tricia Knight, and she represents Verizon Wireless.
Good evening, Tricia Knight representing Verizon Wireless. The answer to your question, there's no existing towers in the immediate downtown. I'm sure you're aware of that. But as defined by the Telecommunications Act, anything on an existing structure is also considered a co-location. And we're able to screen the antennas on this facility was one of the reasons it was so favorable.
That's it?
Okay, thank you.
At this point, we'll open this to public comment. And we have any questions or comments about this? Anybody like to address the commission on this? No? Okay, we'll close the public hearing on the Verizon. Oh, I'm sorry. Come on, step up. State your name, please.
Stephanie Statham. I think I was here before when this issue was going to be addressed, and it got canceled. My only question was whether or not there was any noise or generator or anything coming from the tower. Okay.
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak about this? Okay, at this point, we'll close the public comment. Anyone like to make a motion on this?
I have a comment first.
Please.
In the notice of exemption, there's a discrepancy. It says that the project would not result in a change of existing overall height of the building. And in fact, it results in a change of 4 foot in the height of the building.
That's glaring.
It's noted in the comments and it's noted on the drawing, but it says differently in the exemption, so
Okay.
we need to change that.
All right. Roy, do you have any suggestions as to language that would, yeah. Brittany, can you give him that?
He's reading.
It's still within the allowable height.
Right, so I would just say that it's
Within the 35 foot.
yeah, that the 4 foot increase is still both within allowable height and is only a minor modification to the exterior of the structure, and the categorical exemption would be fine.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll make a note of that.
Thank you, Jack.
Any other questions about this, you guys? Want to make a motion adopting Resolution 1802? Please, come on up. State your name.
My name is Cherie Brenner, and I was curious, what is the purpose of putting it there to begin with? It may have been at another meeting I was at, but I wasn't at, but I'm just curious, what is the purpose of having it plopped right there?
Staff?
Yeah. Tricia, will you come and enlighten us a little bit on that? Thank
Sure,
you.
of course. So, we all can pretty much hold a call these days, but it's more of a capacity issue. So either when high tourist seasons or emergency situations, this is going to offload the capacity almost like lanes on a highway as they become overwhelmed from the other sites that surround the city. So this is just to be able to offload that overwhelmed facility that's already in service.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We've approved several of these, haven't we, over the last 4 or 5 years that I've been here. How many do we have in the city now? 5 or 6?
4 or 5. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
That calls out a need for a map, however.
Correct.
I should do that. Vice Mayor.
Any other public comment? Any other commissioners' comments on this item?
No.
Motion?
Sure. I'll make the motion. Make the findings for approval for the project specified in Attachment A, Stat Report, including the CEQA findings. Adopt Resolution 18-02, approve the conditional use permit subject to the conditions of approval, and accept the categorical exemption pursuant to the guidelines for implementation under the CEQA. As modified with the moderate height differential.
Second?
I'll second it.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. So that's adopted. And
Okay.
if we can go on to switcheroo to item A, public hearing on new development in the city projects. And if anybody who came in late, we are going to limit the speaking to 3 minutes. And we will be strict on that because there's an awful lot of people here and a lot of people want to be heard. So we're happy to hear everyone, but just keep it under 3 minutes or less. And if somebody got up before you and says pretty much the exact same thing you're going to say as a courtesy to others, we know there's strong feelings about this, and we can just keep it brief. That'd be great. Staff report?
Thank you. Thank you, Planning Commissioners, Chair Clark, and members of the community. Before you tonight is a request to consider land use scenarios that are offered in the staff report, prepared by the consultants and requested by council, for the purpose of preparing the fiscal impact component of the sphere of influence amendment and annexation feasibility study. The recommendation is that the Planning Commission consider the presentation of staff and the consultant team, receive public testimony regarding the 4 land use scenarios under consideration, and adopt the draft resolution forwarding Planning Commission's comments to City Council and recommending that City Council authorize the consultant team to prepare the fiscal impact analysis. Just to review the history for this request, it was a council conversation since 2004, but especially starting in 2015 and then again in 2016. In a recent goal-setting action, future growth was identified as a city goal, and the action step identified with that goal was to provide funding to initiate the annexation feasibility study. Also identified, identified as a strategic economic development goal. To implement these goals, councils requested that a feasibility study regarding potential annexation and an SOI expansion be conducted. Money was allocated for the study in 2016 and then again in 2017. In mid-2017, the request for proposal was released, the consultant selected, and the results of that process and the consideration of alternatives is starting tonight. So what is council direction to the consultants and staff? That the consultants provide land use scenarios and the related fiscal analysis for parcels identified in previous council meetings. Where are we in the process? Previous parcels were evaluated and some have been eliminated. And of the remaining, staff and the consultants reached out to every property owner to ask them to share their thoughts on land uses, and meetings were held with every interested property owner. From that, the consultants created 4 land use scenarios, given property owner input and also with consideration of environmental and regulatory constraints. One of these goals was to consider land uses that the county did not already offer, and you will see some of those tonight. We are holding the first of 4 public hearings on this item tonight. The next meeting is anticipated to be with council on February 26th. And the things to keep in mind is that Planning Commission can recommend anything they wish to council for their consideration, not just rigidly these 4 land use scenarios. And finally, even if an eventual annexation goes forward, the property owner may continue to use their property in the same way that they always have, should they choose to do so. At this time, we will turn the item over to our consultants for their presentation. At the conclusion of that, I'm available to assist with any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Holly.
Good evening, Commissioners and members of Solvang. My name's David Foote with FIRMA. I have with me Dave Moran from DeLeo Moran. He's helping me on this project, teaming up. The other component of our team is Stanley Hoffman Associates. They run the fiscal analysis, and they don't need to be here tonight because that's the next step. So that's who we are, and as Holly mentioned, we are taking direction here from the City Council in their kind of early thinking and moving forward with this notion. And I would just comment and note, having done, between Dave and I, and probably Stan too, quite a number of annexation-related exercises with different municipalities. And it's not unusual to have a city that is approaching build-out, which the city is, which build-out of the general plan basically means the land is being all developed for the uses that it's planned for. And at that juncture, it's not unusual at all to take a step back and go, where are we then going? For example, the state will continue to require cities to allocate in their general plan enough land for various types of housing needs. That's a reality. There's different ways to do that. It doesn't mean you have to annex land to do that, but that's just an example of the sort of stream of things that keeps right on going even when you have, quote unquote, built out your city. So the council gave us direction to look at a number of parcels, which I'll go through in more detail. But the purpose of the annexation study is twofold. We're calling it a sphere of influence line and annexation study. Both of those terms are perhaps a little foreign. The last time Solvang did this was, I believe, not that long ago, but it was the little Sunnyfields Park Triangle, which was annexed into the city at the time that the county realized they didn't need that land anymore, and Solvang realized they really needed a park. So the city sphere is something that is arrived at in collaboration with the Local Agency Formation Commission, which is a county entity that is under state law charged with managing these kinds of expansions and incorporations and changes. Council, I think a couple years ago, had a presentation from the director of Santa Barbara County LAFCO. We may need to update that. The sphere of influence line then is a line where the city thinks they may grow someday, and the virtue of that line, among other things, is that you have a little more standing with the county as to what goes on there. Not a lot, but some. The county normally consults with the city about projects that occur in the county. They would probably be held to a little higher standard on that consultation should they want to develop land in your sphere. In other words, you kind of put in a stake, you're a stakeholder, a little different kind of stakeholder. So the sphere is one level. The next level is then lands in the sphere can be created in the sphere and annexed at the same time, or land in the sphere can be subsequently annexed into the city and then become part of the city. It would have a general plan designation, a zoning, and so forth. So that's what the city council is stepping back to think about. So what we've been asked to do as part of that to start is to identify some land uses that might be appropriate given some of the direction we've gotten from council and also in interviewing landowners. So we're going to get to slide, there we go. We're to the second bullet point. The purpose of this meeting tonight is obviously to talk about the land use options, but throughout is to provide a basis for some fact-based decision-making. One of the efforts in that regard is the baseline information report, existing conditions and constraints, which you got as an attachment, which is a compilation of adopted city plans and policies, basically. It includes all of the different policies, LAFCO policies and applicable city policies in the back, just as a compendium. And all of that stuff is just adopted information. We didn't create new information. We simply are putting it all in one place to kind of recount the setting that we're dealing with. So at the end of this, we hope to have a document that informs the public and decision makers about the issues and opportunities related to moving forward with a sphere change or an annexation. And one of the things that's part of that is the fiscal implications. And that basically means this. When you bring land into a city, you have services that you need to provide. And often that is one of the reasons land is brought into a city, is to have services they wouldn't otherwise have in the county. The other factor that's like a ratio to that is revenue stream. So you have to provide services, you're hoping to have a revenue stream, and the purpose of the fiscal study, the major part of our whole effort, is to simply cast a net out there for some land use scenarios and then run the numbers and see if it's fiscally neutral, negative, or if there's some positive benefits with some of these land use scenarios. That's simply one consideration that you and the council will be undertaking. But the fiscals is a very meaningful part of that, because obviously it has long-term ramifications for the city. Next slide. So tonight, we're going to look at land use scenarios. These will serve as the basis for the fiscal analysis. The fiscal consultant has models that they can plug in revenue streams for different kinds of land uses. They have factors related to the cost of services here from your budget. So we know what you spend for services. We know what land uses typically can generate, and so it'll provide a basic framework to understand, is this fiscally positive, neutral, or negative? So that's where we're hoping to go. It's somewhat of a time-consuming process. We only want to do it once. So the land use scenarios provided tonight are kind of like a reality check. Like, is this basically the range of things we want to consider to plug into this model? Because the model will produce meaningful numbers to make decisions on. Again, I want to emphasize that I would never consider fiscal being the bottom line final factor to make it land use policy, but it's one important factor. So before we do that, we want to have you and the council to deliberate on these land use scenarios. So I want to real briefly, or I don't think the public is going to fully understand what we're limited to tonight and where we're going, is briefly go over the steps that we've done and where we're going. So Holly mentioned some of these, but basically the first thing we did was the conditions and constraints baseline report, which you have. That's a compendium of existing policy, and it describes the various physical and resource constraints and some of the regulatory issues related to the county and city and LAFCO. We met with city staff, and we talked in very general terms about land use, and it was concluded that we would create 2 land use scenarios for each of the areas, the northeast and west part of the city. And the basic approach early on was to elicit some kind of input from landowners. And the reason for that is that annexations normally do not proceed without landowner cooperation and interest. And so, as Holly mentioned, what's going on here is not going to preempt what landowners want. So often annexations occur and sphere changes occur when landowners are interested in moving that direction. In this case, I will just mention briefly at this point that there is some interest of a few of the landowners. Some of them are not interested, and some of them didn't respond to our request to engage. So we have a real spectrum of interest. And having said that, I think that staff and the consultant team stepped back and realized, hearkening back to the council, that the council is looking at this, I believe, and this is what I took away from the meeting that I came to where they deliberated on this, is that this is really a longer term look at this point. Because there's not a strong landowner push yet at this point, it's by necessity a little more open-ended and a longer term look. But it's a necessary step to even know what we're talking about. So, longer term look. So one of the schemes took into account more of the landowners' requests, not all of them, but more of them, and the other scenarios leaned a little more towards a resourced responsive land use scenario. In other words, more, less density, less use of resources, more of the agricultural values retained, and so forth. So we have a bit of a spectrum between the 2 scenarios. So we're hoping for direction from you tonight, and then in a couple of weeks, definitive direction from the council. The next step, as I mentioned, will be a fiscal study. And then having run that, we will come back with a draft SOI and annexation feasibility study to you and then the city council. At that point, what you'll have is the compilation of all the background information summarized, the land use scenarios described and tabulated, similar to what we've done so far, with a little more information about service demands. We've estimated kind of order of magnitude service demands like water and sewer, but we'll fine-tune that. The document will include the fiscal study and then conclusionary analysis. So that's where we're going. We're about halfway through the process. So some background. We're going to go into maps now, and hopefully that'll help the public especially understand where we are in the process, how we got there, and what we think the council's telling us. So we began by looking at 5 areas that the council identified, 19 parcels. We did preliminary screening of environmental and regulatory constraints at a very high level. However, we did have the benefit, for example, of the recent updated conservation and open space element of the general plan, which was actually prepared by us. And so there's a lot of very recent information about constraints and resources in that. It's very up to date. So the 2 study areas, one we're calling the Western Study Area, it's 11 parcels, about 295 acres. Northeast was 4 parcels, about 88 acres. Next slide, please. So we did use, before we get into the properties themselves, we did in our policy and background analysis consider Solvang's general plans, LAFCO policies. But I think we need to be very clear that a document like the San Ynez Valley Community Plan, this annexation study is not going to be consistent with that. By definition, we're exploring something outside the bounds of what they envisioned with green belts and things like that. So that's sort of understood, that the council is saying, let's step way back and think about this. And so I want everybody to understand that we understand what that document is, and I believe the city council does. So we proceeded on this basis, okay? We're not trying to be consistent with that plan necessarily. We understand and are sympathetic to many of its goals, and I think a lot of city policy reflects that also. But I think we need to understand that that's not what we've been asked to do. We've been asked to look at some land use scenarios that have a little different purpose. I'll go into more detail. So there are the areas that were identified by council, the Western Area 1, and then Area 4 is what we're calling the Northeast. In our very early analysis, we realized areas 2, 3, and 5 were probably not feasible. Areas 3 and 4 due to land use adjacency issues, access problems, existing overlays and constraints, flooding, just not probably a good urban expansion area. Area 5, the main reason we took that off was that it is under an agriculture preserve or land contract, which is fixed for 10-year terms, and so the soonest it could be considered for anything is 10 years upon the day that the landowners issue a notice of non-renewal. So that was so far out that we decided to not include that one. So that leaves us with the 3 parcels in Area 4 and the several parcels there in Area 1. Next slide. So there's where we're focusing, less the Latan piece, which is on the west side of Alamo Pintada. That one dropped out next. Okay, we'll zoom in on the west side. 11 parcels, about 300 acres. In the lower right corner, you'll see a dashed line around the blue and orange areas. That is the existing sphere of influence line within the city. And then you see 246 bisecting the 2 properties, and then on both sides there's the balance of this nearly 300 acres that is all zoned agriculture in the county. And we have various Petersons here owning several of the parcels, the Skit family, and then the Dakota Smith LLC has the bulk of the land in the remaining 5 parcels. Here is next slide, please. A little zoom in. I think most people are familiar with what's going on in the sand and gravel, former sand and gravel operation and what's happening there, and then the Skit property with some of the kind of light industrial businesses. You'll see the river to the bottom there, and there is the city limits along the river. That area does have a floodplain that encroaches significantly into the Peterson property, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. Next. On the northeast, there's the Latam property on the left side that we've dropped from consideration at this point, although you or the council could ask us to put it back in. The remaining 3 parcels are owned by 3 different entities. The Aguirre Trust, and then what's known as the ranch, the church property, and then the Pollard Trust is the one next to Sunny Fields. Okay, process for selecting these. We did a basic environmental constraint survey. We looked at regulatory constraints. We became familiar in a little more detail with what's going on those properties. We incorporated landowner interests and expectations. I would probably need to say we considered and incorporated. We didn't fully incorporate anyone's full expectations. But we definitely considered them, and we tried to understand what it is they might be seeking, because again, they will ultimately drive this should it move forward. So it made sense to at least listen to what they're thinking about. We used land uses that would help the city meet one or more unmet need, which are already identified in your various policy documents. One is revenue generation. I would add that whatever revenue being generated would not compete with the downtown core. We wouldn't be wanting to propose hotel uses out on the fringe. Workforce housing is sort of a looming and perennial need that I think your commission will become more aware of in the next year or two. I think it's just going to be something that is being talked about a lot in California and here too, due to the cost of housing. And then another one was parkland. There's a continuing idea of a regional facility, or at least more facilities. Solvang has and continues to supply a lot of the recreational sports space for the valley, and that was something that had been identified. So we took into account surrounding land uses and tried to be sensitive within the basic forward direction we were asked to pursue. And we're trying to respect the significant constraints. In other words, we're not proposing things that could never occur in a floodplain, for example. So we're aware of those. And that looking for land uses that would require city services that wouldn't be available in the county, that a landowner would not have the ability to have unless they were in the city. So that's obviously consideration. Okay, factors to consider. Reiterating, these scenarios are for the purpose of preparing the fiscal analysis. They don't commit the city or the property owner to any course of action. At the end of the day, should the council accept our end product and say, great, thank you for the study, we now have a lot of information, all, some, or none of these properties could come forward in the future for annexation. It's a non-binding document. It's advisory almost. It's a blueprint for thinking. So the 2 scenarios for each one, as I mentioned, scenarios 1 and 3 emphasize property owner interests, and scenarios 2 and 4 respond to environmental and regulatory issues. Okay. You folks are more used to looking at these sorts of maps, perhaps, than the general public. So I'll carefully go through this. I know a lot of the people in the audience from the letters that Holly has forwarded me have been looking carefully at these documents and coming up to speed with them. The tabulation on the left side is just what we planners always do. We add up things and we tabulate them. Acres, dwelling units, square footage of non-residential floor area, potential population, and employment potential. And these are first very generalized pass, and so you can see 372 dwelling units, 83,000 residential, non-residential floor area in industrial or commercial service, population of nearly 900, employment population of something like 200. Again, very early first pass. Now, beginning at the bottom of the map, you'll see the San Ynez River with an RC designation, which is resource conservation. That's basically the floodplain. There are land uses that can occur there, and one of them is an RV park. The rec zone, which is the green zone, is in fact a land use category that an RV park could occur on, and that seemed like a non-competing revenue stream non-competing with the downtown revenue stream type thing with a fairly light footprint on the land. Moving up from that, the Skid property, commercial service, which is a slightly different and maybe more intensified potential for light industry and tech center, or a little more varied and intensified service in that purple piece. And then on both sides of Alamo Pintado in the dark blue is your DR zone, which is for 240. What did I say? Alamo Pintado? That's another street. That's another street. 246. Thank you. Your DR zone, design residential with a higher density, that is where we are thinking workforce housing might go. A little higher density, a little lower cost per dwelling unit. That is, there's always a concern about what the gateway looks like. We deal with this all the time in our profession. And projects like that can look good. It's not, it might look even better than service commercial. So it's more dense. It would be bringing the city out to that point with a higher density product for sure. Then the 7R1, which I believe is, what is that? It's low density residential, 5 dwelling units to the acre, something like that. That is the light blue, and that's sort of tucked up against both of these other land uses. Then we move to the Peterson property, the 3E1, which is basically retaining that existing parcel and zoning size. Then to the west of that, the A10, it would be 10-acre agriculture parcels. Again, that would be in the city. It would be a different new category for the city, but it would retain the agricultural zoning. And then the top piece, which is kind of an upland mesa, the E110, is a state residential, maybe something like 30 to 35 home sites on that scenario. Next slide. Actually, back up to that. The 1E1 top mesa area, what we're thinking of that is not carving that into 34 parcels. What we're thinking is something that you may or may not be familiar with, but is used quite a bit in some counties, notably in San Luis Obispo County. It's called an agricultural cluster subdivision. And basically what that is you take land that has resource value, either for agriculture directly or scenic value or other watershed protection, and you allow a certain density in a cluster, and then you retain anywhere from 60 to 90% of the property in a permanent conservation agriculture. And so that would be retaining as much of the open space and agricultural value as feasible and still getting some density. So when I say 34 dwelling units, they would be clustered somewhere in between the density of Skip Mesa and then the surrounding parcels to the north of it. So it would be kind of a transition density. Again, we're bringing to bear a little bit of our experience to come up what we hope is a creative approach to a way to look at different kinds of land uses that could meet landowner expectations as well as respecting the values of the community. Next. Scenario 2 takes that ag portion and just the light area A10, just all 10 acre. It expands the 3E1, which is very low density residential, estate residential, out from the Peterson property, yielding maybe 10 lots or dwelling units. The southern portion, the higher density residential in the dark blue and lighter density or lower density in the light blue are about the same as previous scheme. But it takes the portion of the Peterson property and designates it industrial business park, and then including some of the Skip property, and then the front part of the Skip property, commercial service, which would be a little bit more of a public interface kind of commercial service, not so much industrial. We can go more into that if you like. And then it takes the whole floodplain and makes it resource conservation. So a little less dense, a little more responsive to the physical setting there. With higher employment and less population, which makes sense. The industrial would have higher employment and the lower density would have a lower population. That makes sense. All right, moving up to the northeast, this scheme, we are suggesting a new land use category, which we're calling agriculture tourism. And this is kind of a novel approach to retaining agricultural values while increasing the intensity of what might happen on the parcel. So it would be an agricultural zoning, but under county zoning, if you want to do anything more intensive in terms of selling anything, you're limited to, I think, 600 square foot, like a fruit stand kind of thing, very limited. There are other examples around California of zonings that will allow for more intensification of an ag property that include U-pick, that include value added, where a product is an ag raw product is then processed into olives in a jar. Obviously wine is an example too, but there are other products, spectrum of products that bring in more public, value-added concept to what they're producing. You get a higher revenue stream. You may need water and sewer from the city, and so there's the value of bringing it into the city. It also produces something that's a little different than the rest of the tourism in the city without competing directly with it. So as a gateway kind of destination where people might stop on their way down through first, it's more of a visitor serving. That's why we added the tourism title to the agricultural tourism. So it's intended to draw people, the general public, to the property. The I land use designation would be the typical land use designation within an urban area for a church or a school or something like that. Well, public facility, institutional. So that's basically church zoning. We met with the property owners there. They have a vision for that property that includes a church. It did interestingly include some agriculture, so that negotiation is open, but this scheme just called it all institutional. The Pollard property to the south, we designated rec for an RV park for the same reasons that we thought an RV park was a good land use on the western properties. We also carved out a portion adjacent Sunnyfield Park that could be worked out in the process of this whole annexation and rezoning and everything. That land is dedicated to the city, or the city buys it at some discount, or I hope that Pollard's not here, but they sell it. More park. That's a chance for more park. It's immediately adjacent to Sunnyfields. The dark blue line running through and extending into the Pollard property there is the 100-year flood line for Alamo and Pintado Creek. And then the last land use category is the riparian corridor on either side of the creek there, and that's the RC zone. Okay, next slide. This permutation simply flips the RV concept to ag tourism on the Pollard property, retains the recreation idea for park expansion, and leaves the other two the same way. So it would probably have a lower employment potential and probably a lower revenue stream, but that's our lighter touch, more agricultural resource scheme. Next slide. So next step, City Council will get your recommendations in a couple of weeks, and we'll take this to them. We'll do the fiscal impact analysis, and then all of these, as I mentioned before, will be compiled into a draft document that will go back to you and then to the City Council for final approval. I don't know that it would be considered adoption. It is simply an information document. So
Yeah.
it won't have a CEQA document. I need to, if I haven't yet said this, this is not a project under CEQA. It's not required to have an environmental document. It would be inappropriate to do it. The steps following the council acceptance of our report would be for a landowner and the city in conjunction to proceed with one or more of these parcels to the next step, which would be to engage with LAFCO and prepare whatever specific plan or pre-zoning documents to begin that process to ultimately take a proposal to LAFCO for a sphere and annexation or only a sphere change. That's the point where an environmental document will be done. That's a project under CEQA, and that's where, armed with the knowledge that the city will have about the community's values, the fiscal implications, the land use issues and resource issues, that you get a much closer look at all of those things in an environmental document, and that would be required. And the city would be the lead agency and adopt that document. Then it ultimately would go to LAFCO for deliberation and approval or denial. And that's how the process in a nutshell works. So there are many steps. And from a fiscal standpoint, it would be very, it's not ordinary for the city to pay for that process. It's generally landowner driven and paid for. So it's their deal, kind of. So that, I hope, answers some of the question the public may have and you about the overall picture and where we are. So thank you. I know that was a long presentation, but I think there's a lot of information that is not commonly discussed in your city, so it's good background, I hope.
Okay. We'll open this up for commissioners' comments or questions, but in a nutshell, 10 words or less, why is the city of Solvang doing this for people in the audience?
The main message I took from the council was to have control, to know their options, to be able to control their destinies on around the city.
Okay.
That I would say that was the most succinct statement that I took from the council on that.
Okay.
The second reason would simply be there has been some landowner interest.
Are any landowners right now currently wanting to develop those properties?
Dakota definitely, which is most of that property on the west, they definitely are interested.
And currently, if they wanted to develop that property, they'd go to the county of Santa Barbara.
That's correct.
And we would have no say whatsoever in what they do with that property.
You would get a say, but you don't have any real discretionary approval.
Correct. So this would only bring this into our sphere so that we can say yay or nay on something that upsets people or people want or don't want.
Yes,
Okay.
that's, yes,
All right. And should this go forward, this is only a study, right?
that's right.
Correct. There's no proposed development anywhere.
Correct.
Thank you. Yeah, church and ag would be like a Jonestown kind of place, right? Can we? No? I'm sorry. I would tell a joke about Jonestown, but the punchline's too long. And how much does this cost?
In the six figures, for
Okay.
sure, multiple six figures for everybody involved, both the landowners, consultants, the city's consultants.
And you've done this with other cities, obviously. This is your business. And you get a big turnout at all these meetings, correct?
Oh, yeah, definitely,
Okay.
sure. It's,
Split 50-50, 90 no, 10 yes?
oh, it can change from when you start to when you end.
And then down the road, should this go forward, how many years are we talking about for this property? Or for this development, or for this, that's a bad word. How many years for this annexation?
Well, let's just say one of the landowners comes forward, and I don't think it would be any longer or shorter for any of them. Some might be more straightforward, but it would be years. Not many years, but not less than 1 year. Probably 2 years, I'm guessing.
And the county has to agree to this.
The county is a partner, and the LAFCO really is. The county's at the table, but really only technically because they have a representative on LAFCO,
Okay,
which the city does too,
thank you.
currently.
That's
But-
all my
but-
questions, and hopefully that would just address a few of the questions the audience might have as well.
But wouldn't
Sorry, wait,
the
one
city be
second.
a party to that too? I mean, the city's going to have to determine whether they can provide services and so forth. So they would also definitely be a party.
And that's all inclusive in the study.
The city would have to accept the application for processing, first of all,
Okay.
and then do the CEQA document, and then deliberate, do a staff report, and say yes or no before you ever get to LAFCO.
Okay, this is a study. All right, other commissioners' comments or questions of the the presenter?
I actually
wait.
do, if no one else does. Roy?
Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because we were talking about context, is when you look at the sphere of influence component, the purpose of sphere of influence is to look out 20 years. It's not intended to be a sudden process. So certainly you can legally combine changes of sphere of influence annexation at the same time, but they can be separate, and when combined, it's still going to take all these years and all the other steps that we talked about.
Thank you. Gay?
Okay, and this goes back to what Mr. Foote was just saying a few minutes ago. So we're not looking at extending our sphere of influence into the Western Study Area or the Northeast Study Area in total. We're really going to be looking at this on a parcel-by-parcel basis. Is that correct?
That I don't know. That is, that's up to your commission and the city council.
Well, I mean more from the aspect of actually going forward with the sphere of influence and possible annexation. We would be having the property owner have to come forward
Yes,
first.
for annexation, it would definitely be an individual landowner or a consortium of them. But for the sphere, as your city attorney just mentioned, the sphere could proceed independently first, and that could be city initiated. That's really, you're more in the driver's seat, and that's, as he mentioned, it's really saying, we're really taking the big picture here. We're looking 20 years out. The annexation part of it can be a much later piece or a never piece.
Right.
I think that's, I'm glad you asked, and we weighed in, and I hope that's clear.
Okay, that makes more sense to me. And then the fiscal analysis, will that be done by land use so that if a property owner came forward and wanted to do something with one or more land uses, will we be able to make a decision based on just that parcel, that potential development plan, or will we be looking at an analysis that takes into account the whole fiscal impact of our scenarios that we
It'll
recommend?
be broken out by land use for sure. It's not that hard to break out by parcel, but it's basically by land use. So this will be one number, and I would fully expect, should one or more of these go forward, there would be another fiscal study.
Okay.
You know, because once it's really set, the applicants would pay for another one, and it would be fine-tuned for sure.
And at the stage when you have to do SQL analysis for an actual project, which annexation certainly would be, in addition to wanting to do what we generally think of as a fiscal study, oftentimes fiscal aspects can lead to environmental impact. So generally, in these contexts, a SQL document would also touch on that. But this type of study can be the building block leading up to more particular studies.
Okay, one other quick question. Could somebody define prime agricultural land?
Well, Dave's going to help me on this because there's different definitions. There are different definitions. Usually they're based on the soil type, but they're also jointly determined by productivity and whether it's irrigated and whether the property had a certain revenue stream over the last 3 to 5 years. So land that's on the border edge of prime can become prime. An example would be grapes can make it prime ag land because you're irrigating and have a huge revenue stream. But usually prime ag land originates from the concept of very flat, very fertile, very easy to manage agricultural resource. There's a much more complicated answer, and one of the two of them may have to weigh in more. But
Well, the reason that I asked, and I may be opening a can of worms here, but when I was looking at the Santa Barbara County zoning codes, they have Ag 1 and Ag 2. And all the land in the study areas are currently zoned as Ag 1. And I didn't find any mention of prime agricultural land in those codes, only in Ag 2. So I don't know if that's a conflict with the Santa Ynez Valley Community Plan, or if we're talking land versus soils or what? But I found it confusing.
Yeah, there isn't just one, and I'm the lawyer talking, so legal definition of prime ag land. It's the words are often used in legal contexts, in planning contexts, and in political contexts. And those are all valid contexts to discuss it, but they all have different meanings and they don't transfer one to the other. A lot of codes for counties don't define what is prime and what isn't. On the other hand, a lot do, but there isn't just one accepted standard. Makes it very difficult.
Comment and then question. I know we'll keep our comments till the end, and this is mostly just questions, but just to lay it out, it seems to me that there are those folks that wanted or looked at annexation for expansion, urban sprawl, if you will, the words that are used, and there are those folks that looked at annexation to simply control it without urban sprawl, because they would trust the city government, where they would have a bigger voice rather than a county government, which tends to be more political, a 2-2 with a fifth swing that we have seen for decades in our county. I don't know how many folks feel one way or the other, but my question is, was there a scenario looked at? And it seems to me, I'm not city council, a little remiss on our part that we didn't look at a scenario where we annex, but we leave everything the same zone. We just want to control it because we trust our city government more than a county government, where you can't go to their meetings. And was that ever, why isn't that a scenario of we want to annex? So it's annexation, if I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, is one step, obviously a big step above sphere of influence. Sphere of influence, they can ignore us. Annexation, we have control over it, and therefore, was it looked at to simply annex these areas and leave the zoning exactly how it's been for as long as it's been?
Well, I'm going to take a stab at that. Dave Moran may want to weigh in, but I think that we concluded that LAFCO would just shrug their shoulders and laugh. It's like, it can stay ag under county purview. I think we'd have the city would have a hard case to press for that. I just don't think LAFCO would see a compelling reason. Any other reasons you can think of?
The other thing you might be doing is simply moving the same issues further out. In other words, you annex for control, well, you still have that boundary between the city and the county. It's just out further. There are ways that you can sort of ensure that there's no additional development either in this, well, in the city if you annex it, like conservation easements, green belt, that type of thing. But you still run the risk of simply moving the issue further out.
And if you...
Let me just finish. So basically annexation is only for growth. It's not to preserve, it's not to keep the open space, it's not to keep it as is. You would never get approval from LAFCO for annexation unless you wanted urban development, which is in the report. I mean, otherwise, why would you do that, correct?
Yeah, LAFCO would want to see a compelling need for city services in that area. I'll be honest with you, they have very strict policy under state law about preserving prime ag land, or at least mitigating for it. And every LAFCO I've ever heard of takes pretty seriously the charge of being environmentally responsible on resource protection. So they aren't all about just, well, good, you're going to develop it, we'll approve it. But I think that they would be surprised to get a proposal come forward that didn't have a compelling reason why why the city should grow there due to need for some revenue, which is a valid reason, or housing, which is also a valid reason, provided they can provide the services to those land uses. LAFCO would entertain that. They may approve or deny it, but that's the normal package that they get.
And in your study, it seems to me, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, concludes that there really isn't a pending immediate need for Solvang to grow. with housing or with commercial or with industrial, given that we're not built out, given that we're years down the road. I mean, I'm just trying to understand the compelling need then for the urban development, I suppose. If it's not just to keep a green belt under our control, but it is to grow. I've read the study a bunch of times, and I know you don't conclude absolutely, but it's pretty clear that we have a lot of infill to do. We've got a lot of other parcels to build. We're not quite there yet. Or correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, Dave's going to weigh in on that because he crunched the numbers, but I would say that you don't have a lot of land to infill in relative terms to most cities. I would say you're on the downward sunset of that. And as far as other needs, I mean, I think you've got an economic plan that identifies leakage of certain kinds of sales that could be remedied. I think that you have policy documents that would indicate that the city should be thinking. Whether that means annexing or not, that's just the council obviously decided, let's take a look at that avenue. But those two reasons alone are certainly, I think, behind this, would you say?
And workforce housing.
Workforce housing.
And I don't want to argue. I'm just wanting to understand that we have a need to grow, is what we're saying, which is triggering this in the future. We don't have a lot of infill, but it's not just growth for growth's sake. I mean, there is an absolute need from the study that says that if not now, in 5 or 10 or 20 years, we're going to need to meet our needs as a city from a fiscal basis.
I wouldn't go that far. I don't think we can say anything about fiscal yet. Certainly we can't. But I don't think we were asked to make a conclusion on that question, and I don't think we are being asked to conclude on that question. I think we can provide you information and this council information to make that decision, but I think we can with some certainty say that you have identified needs for revenue, stop the retail sales tax leakage, certain kinds of housing, workforce, and then the state RENA numbers are going to always be telling you about your fair share of affordable. It's just going to happen over and over again. It's not going to let up. And once you build on those properties, they're going to still come back and tell you you have to have more. Your share is now more, and then you have to find where you're going to put them. That's the way I interpret state law.
I'd like to add, concerning the background of all of this, I attend or listen to most of the city council meetings, and I heard discussion at city council that there's concern about the need for certain revenue streams and affordable housing and things like that. And that's my understanding of why this whole feasibility study was requested and funded. Not that there's a huge need to grow, but there are some needs the city has to afford our future as a city. I mean, correct me, anybody else, you know.
That's all the questions I have.
Okay. Jack? And then we'll get to public comment.
Yeah, is this a two-step process where we first do a sphere of influence and then annexation, or is it all rolled into one?
No, you have a lot of flexibility. You can do a sphere change on one or more of these properties at any time, city initiated. You can bring an annexation along with that, or many years later. So you have there's a lot of ways it could play out. But the sphere would be the first step. And again, it could be accompanied by an annexation, but it doesn't have to.
So how does that play into the scenarios that we're being asked to recommend to the council?
We don't know what any individual landowner is really going to want to do on timing or anything. We're basically stepping back and going, all things that we are considering, we're asking you, are these reasonable assumptions and scenarios that might yield you useful information? They can change. Again, if on the basis of this information, one or more landowner the light goes on and they change direction and want to come back to you with something different that suddenly might be more appealing to you, or, you know, things change. They can do that, at which time you would kind of go through this all again. You would do another fiscal study, but this time with the landowner applicant paying the bills and driving the ship.
So these scenarios that you've come up with are things that we will not be telling the owners that we want to do. These are things that you're suggesting the owners have said they would like to do on their property. Is that correct?
Kind of both. I mean, it's up to the city. Again, this is an informational document. So the city council, with your input, could give direction to staff to say, we like that idea of RV park. Push that with these guys. You have total flexibility to do that. And say, no, we really don't want to have this here. We'd rather have, that happens all the time in this process of land development. The city gets to weigh in on what they really think's best. So yeah, you'd have flexibility on that.
So these scenarios are really just a straw man of what possibly could happen.
That's right, right. Something on which to base a fiscal, we have to have some land use category and area that we can attach the fiscal components to come up with a number. And it has to be reasonable, and it has to be a scenario that could happen, or it's meaningless, right?
Right.
So it'll give knowledge, it'll give facts. That's really all it's intended to do.
That's a good point.
Yeah, for instance, and I'm just going to make things up, but because there isn't one rule of thumb that applies throughout the state. That's why you would need to do a study instead of just go to .gov California and say, does this type of development pay for itself? Get an actual fiscal study, and let's say we're thinking this would be a great place to fulfill our workforce housing needs. And then you do the fiscal analysis and you find out that, well, and yeah, we can meet the needs, but the cost of providing that service, of doing that, is going to far exceed the potential increased property taxes or whatever revenues. And so you think about those things, but you have real numbers to look at instead of just off-the-cuff guesses.
We have something to base a decision
Yes.
on. And I have one more question. What is the story with this church? Is it a real thing?
We met with the landowner. They
planning
own
to build a church there
They
regardless?
do. They've talked to the county already. They could develop the church in the county. They may have even applied. I don't remember if they applied or whether, I don't remember exactly. But they are well on their way. They have a physical plan that they'd like to do, and yeah, it seemed real to us, so we just carried it forward.
So that's why that's in there, because
Yeah.
they've already started down that path.
Yes.
Where's the church at?
Okay. Any other comments
We'll get to
by the commissioners? No? Okay, fun part now. I have 30 requests for speak at 3 minutes apiece. Aaron, what's 30 times 3?
60.
90 we have 90 minutes. So we'll open this up for public discussion now. Can we bring, is it Penny? Penny Knowles? That's an A.
Sorry, my
Hi,
handwriting is
Penny.
terrible. Good evening. I'm Penny Knowles.
Started.
I live in Santa Ynez. I am the president of We Watch, which is a valley-wide environmental organization committed to preserving the rural character of the Santa Ynez Valley. Although I am not a Solvang resident, I believe that what you are proposing affects not just Solvang, but the entire valley. Those of us who live in the valley, both those who were born here and those who've come more recently, have come here to escape the urban sprawl infecting much of Southern California. The founders of our organization were involved 25 years ago with the formulation of the Valley Blueprint, which became the basis for the Santa Ynez Valley Community Plan, subsequently in 2009 incorporated into the Santa Barbara County General Plan. The introductory overview of this plan says, the oak-studded Santa Ynez Valley, nestled between two towering mountain ranges in central Santa Barbara County, boasts an enviable quality of life for its residents. Still friendly small towns with unique individual character are linked by scenic rural roads featuring bucolic views of farms, ranches, and pristine natural areas. The local economy is strong, anchored by thriving agriculture and tourism industries. Residents enjoy an unhurried pace of life. Night skies still dark enough for stargazing, clean air, ample recreational opportunities, and abundant natural resources. The rural charm, comfort, and beauty of the valley that has remained relatively unchanged for so long stands in stark contrast to the Anytown, USA atmosphere that has engulfed many communities across California and the rest of the country. When codified, the Santa Ynez Valley Community Plan included specifically, future residential development should not be located on prime food-producing or pasture land, but close to existing public services. The beauty of the land should be preserved by limiting urban sprawl and creating buffer zones to maintain the individual character of each town. That was on page 9 of the plan. We Watch would like the Solvang Planning Commission to reflect back on the goals established 25 years ago. If you proceed with the scenarios you contemplate, you will damage not only the city of Solvang, enjoyed by tourists for its quaintness, but also the rural character of the entire valley. On behalf of the members of We Watch, many of whom are Solvang residents, I urge you to abandon any plans for annexing agricultural lands on the western and northeastern borders and converting them to residential or commercial uses.
Thank you. Penny, I have one quick question for you. Does We Watch address the Buellton City Council meetings and Planning Commission meetings as well?
They can when it's a valley-wide issue.
Thank you. Rod Simmons?
Good evening. I'm Rod Simmons. I live at 758 Mesa Vista. I'm back up to it. One of the questions I come with, we're talking about driving a ship. Who's paying you guys? I mean, where is that coming from? We watched a very slick 3-minute presentation that looks like it's well rehearsed, been given several times before, and who's paying you gentlemen to do this?
City of Solvang.
City of Solvang.
City of Solvang and the City Council authorized funding several years ago, beginning it was in the budget in 2016 and then again in 2017. So this was a council-directed action, and these are consultants who've actually worked for various projects around the area, Central Coast area, but also the City of Solvang. So, and it wasn't a 3-minute presentation.
Pardon, ma'am?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It just kind of bothers me that the whole process. I mean, we talk about experience and driving the ship. Have you pulled into Buell Flat and filled up your car and trying to get out on the freeway right there? The traffic's terrible. We watched the Chumash come in and expand and build. The traffic through our town has gotten bigger. We were promised a street light at the bottom of the hill where Skid Mesa went in. For some reason that's gone and never been installed. Water's an issue, still the services, the fire department, the schools. I'm for growth, but I'm for responsible growth. You talk about light industrial building. That's you can call it whatever you want. That's cheap metal buildings. I mean, that's all that is. You talk about agriculture industrial in a 600 square foot. I'm 2 miles from. My wife and I walk 3 times a week from town and back. And you walk through Solvang, and you see these stores that come in and come out. And if it wasn't for the Oriental Express and the Chumash, there wouldn't be much of a tourist trade in town. And there's not room for more expansion. There's not room for more commercial property. The Chip Horton's building across the street, the Castle, it maintains a vacancy. His building in town up here maintains a vacancy. If there's vacancies in town, it's not ready for growth. And you talk about the city's hired, so it's hard to wrap around that the city has hired a group to do this study and we're talking about representing landowners, and it's just also confusing to me. Anyway, I urge you guys, please, shelf this thing, get rid of it, find some other place that'll work, but this is not the place for our valley to grow.
Thank you. Ken Ball. Yeah. And then James Hancock, you're on deck. State your name.
Good evening, Ken Ball. I live in Casper, Wyoming. It's not anywhere near your valley. I went to college out here, Santa Barbara, in the 1970s. Married a Madsen girl 43 years ago from this community. I remember it when there was no grapes. There was just cattle. There was no Chumash casino. It's changed, but it still has the charm, and it still has the beauty that Solvang, you know, the bakeries and the Danish feel that it has. And I would just say one thing to this group, and that is consider not killing the golden goose of the small town charm that's always been here. And if you can keep it, you should. Don't lose it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
James Hancock, and Laura Buff is up next. State your name.
James Hancock. Good evening. I am manager of Buell Flat Rock Company, also H.G. Peterson Family Properties. As this has come along, as I got to know more about this annexation and have talked to the owners, they have shown no interest in for many reasons. The rock and sand business there has been a family-owned business since 1940. Actually started in 39, but they kind of advertised in 1940. Deal with many government agencies. Not sure why the city of Solvang would be better. I haven't personally had a lot of business personally with them, but I can tell you the cost, the time to have the cost has been phenomenal. And the time, I went and got a permit once for, because our office is actually in the city of Solvang, to get a permit to change out our air conditioning unit. It took 4 weeks to get that permit. What's it going to take to get a reclamation plan? And do you have staff? We have an application in now with the lead agency, which is the Santa Barbara County, which we have dealt business for years with a new mining and reclamation plan. I have concerns that you don't have the staff to do that. Well, you know, maybe in the future, but now we have not been addressed that you'd be able to handle that in-house and may have to go, you know, maybe outsourced. And I don't think we'd like to do anything like that. You know, this has been their business, been their livelihoods, their whole lives. And there's just great concern. And not just that, but I touched on it. You know, we deal with it every day, the traffic. The last 3 years is, I'd say, doubled through that intersection. And thank God there hasn't been any serious, right at that intersection anyway, problems. But it has become, I can sit there 10 minutes just trying to get out of there in the afternoon, make a left-hand turn. So, and I haven't seen anything addressed to that at this time. You know, you're talking about, you know, one thing, the industrial part of it might not change a whole lot, but RV parks and the residential, you're talking quite a few more cars in a pretty condensed area. I'm talking to Western Fear there. It's a study there, but it is a great concern. And water is also a great concern. Our wells, not this year, but 3 of the last 4 years, 2 of them have gone dry during the drought. They've come back with the rains or with the release of Kachuma water, but 2 of them completely go dry, and our biggest well that we do our washing with the plant starts accepting air, and we have to close all the valves down and reduce our hours of operation. So water is another very huge concern.
Got it.
So I don't see it right now. Go forward with it.
Thanks, James.
Thank you.
Laura Buff, and Sherry Noble up.
Hi, I'm Laura Buff. I live in Mission Oaks. This study seemed more designed for somebody in Orange County as opposed to Solvang. I was just kind of surprised by a few comments, such as sales tax leakage. That's really from online commerce. I think every city is suffering a loss of sales tax revenue. And where do you guys live? I mean, no, I'm curious. Why would we? Well, because I don't think we want green belts. I think we want open space. This was probably one of the most non-creative use of agricultural lands I ever heard of. Like, let's maintain it as open space and public recreation if possible. And I had one more question. If you want to go forward, does that mean Solvang will spend $600,000 more on the next steps? Is that what I heard? Six figures. Is there more money to be spent studying?
Would you like to address the city council on this, because they're the ones that authorized this?
Yeah.
I don't think we need to attack these gentlemen.
No, I'm
because they're doing a
asking you,
job.
are
They were hired by
Solvang-
the city of Solvang to do a study. This is all we're doing.
Okay, and we're not going forward with
Okay, we don't need to
6
attack
figures
these
more.
guys and ask them
Okay.
where they live, et
Well,
cetera.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Sherry Noble, and then Susan Bott up next.
I'm Sherry Noble. I live in Skip Mesa. I have the concerns about the traffic as well, and have had so many close calls with my daughter, with my granddaughter, and I am really concerned about that. I did not see, and I know someone else is going to address the traffic, so I'm not going to go into it as much, but the traffic, I read the study and looked at it, and I did not see a section on traffic. It's a huge concern, and I am concerned that nobody else is addressing that, and I'm hoping the city council will. I'm a little concerned as a small town, and I'm a single woman who pays taxes for every penny. I work very hard for my money, and I want the city council to represent me, and I know you're not them, but through the planning commission, when I look at my taxes, what am I getting for that? And I want to have people represent me. I know people on the city council, and I would wonder if the planning commission would recommend that those people on the council that have construction businesses exempt themselves, that have any revenue from building, do not vote. And I won't mention names, but we know there are. And I don't think that's a fair representation of my tax dollars. I'm concerned as a resident of Skip Mesa when there's all this mulch around because there's a drought that 3/4 of the new residents couldn't put in grass because there wasn't enough water. And then all of this new growth. And to me, it just doesn't make sense. I'm not a planning person. And just my last comment was, I've probably heard, I'm a great note taker, revenue generation, an unmet city need, we need a revenue stream. I don't get it, and I'm just making that known. I would like that known, why we need more revenue. Why do we need more bureaucracies? Do we need more city salaries? I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Okay. Susan Bott, and Bob Field is up next, please.
Hi, I'm Susan Bott, and I live on Willow Drive. It's at the south end of Solvang. Oak Street, right here, is the escape route for us. Any event which restricts Mission Drive or Alisal means we're corralled in the bottom half of Solvang. And Oak Street's the only way we can get out. Frequently, it's a parking lot. On just a regular day, traveling between San Ynez and Buellton through Solvang is a challenge. Morning rush hour on 246 impedes access to both Highway 101 and 154. For some reason, traffic between 11 and 1 every day is a mess. And after 3 p.m., when the high school gets out, we deal with that. And along Highway 246, it just slows everybody down. Many of us find it faster to detour via Viborg to Alisal or to Fredensborg Canyon and Atterdag to get home to our bottom half, this part of Solvang. we've been told by the folks in those areas that they don't appreciate us trooping through their neighborhoods. Out of the 63 pages in the study, the Sphere of Influence study, there are only 108 words devoted to roads. And while we who live here consider that one of the most important issues, and out of those 108 words, the ones we think are most important are, quote, major new urban development in either study area could necessitate significant roadway improvements to maintain an acceptable level of service into the future. But they failed to provide solutions to that troublesome scenario. While walking and talking door to door these last few weeks in support of our petition opposing Solvang City Council's annexation plans, I've come to find out that I'm not alone. The majority of Solvang residents do not want Solvang to become bigger. To most of us, bigger is not better. By the way, we will be submitting petitions that, well, I put down here that we had 571 signatures, but as I walked in tonight, I had several people give me what amounts to probably another 75 signatures to the City Council, all people opposing any increase in the size of Solvang. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob Field, please. And then Linda Smith is up next.
Hello, my name is Bob Field, and I live in Santa Ynez. The reason I'm here tonight is I think maybe I can help inform your thinking. I've been involved in land use in Santa Barbara County for about 20 years and chaired the VPAC, the committee that finished the Santa Ynez Valley Community Plan. And it's kind of that what I'll talk to in Mr. Peterson's question. This doesn't just, it's not just outside the Santa Ynez Valley Community Plan. This is a head-on collision with the Santa Ynez Valley Community Plan. There are multiple pages, I've got the handout, you can refer to it, where it's expressed. These parcels are named, these areas, as places that should not sprawl. The first reference in county documents that I could find was the 1980 county's comprehensive plan land use element. This is 5 years before Solvang was a city, where the county declared this areas, these buffers should not be built into. It is not in the interest of the valley or the communities. That was vigorously reaffirmed in the community plan process, which, if anything, Solvang had an unfair advantage on. The supervisor that started the community plan was Gail Marshall, a resident of Solvang. Brooks Firestone took over. That's when I got involved. His chief of staff was a former council member and mayor of Solvang. It was approved by Doreen Farr, a resident of Solvang. 3 of the 6 members on my VPAC lived in Solvang. I talked to Marlene Demery every month about every meeting we had and carried her thoughts and the city's thoughts to the meetings. Your community has as much input in this plan as anybody has had. And the reason the plan says what it says in the county's comprehensive plan is because this meeting is like starting with the answer, if this is a good idea, what could we do? Instead of the question, is this a good idea? And the county since 1980, the VPAC, the conclusion has been no, this is not a good idea. And a couple of pointed comments in Santa Barbara County, while the speeches that were made are germane to the subject and appear in the paragraphs, prime ag land is land that exists on a map labeled prime ag land. Those are the variables, but it's black and white. It's on the map or it isn't.
Where is the map?
County website, I can probably go dig it up for you. So that is prime ag land. They've identified it correctly. In terms of the RENA, the state mandate, you could not do anything better to put a target on your town for a housing allocation than to have some extra land that you're not using, except you've said it's for housing. You know, you're just bullseye on that one. You have no defense once you've done that. And then finally, I'll say, I think, you know, we all would admit there's, you know, nobody's perfect. Everybody's got problems, and Solvang's might be traffic, water, and sewer. And you probably get very few opportunities to make all 3 problems worse with one decision.
Thank you, Bob. Linda Smith, please. And then Denise Cornwell's up next.
That's hard to follow. My name is Linda Smith, and I'm a Solvang resident. I'd like to make some comments about the financial affordability of all four scenarios. I agree with everything that's been said and appreciate everything that's been said and all the questions that all of you have asked. The SOI study, I like it in many ways. I thought it was very well done. However, it does warn us that the infrastructure costs to develop beyond our city general plan, as in the western and northeastern proposal areas, may be significant and could be financially prohibitive. 66% of the western study area for scenarios 1 and 2 are designated for housing development. And it's commonly understood that housing developments produce a negative revenue flow. That's an important thing to remember. I know the fiscal study will give that information to us, but that's common knowledge. Prior to new development of housing, the city of Solvang has to build up the infrastructure, incurring large costs and providing essential services, which again could be financially prohibitive, as has been pointed out in the study. The SOI study calculates that we now have 27 years supply of housing and states. Therefore, the current supply of land for residential development appears to be adequate to meet the needs of the city, including its regional fair share of affordable housing well into the future. All important points, I feel. So if there's no present need and housing developments don't bring a positive revenue flow into the city, and the costs for building out the infrastructure require significant investment beforehand and may be financially prohibitive, why are we considering this land use? And its related annexation process to take these valuable open rural areas of an entrance view corridor out of protected status. Solvang's general plan for guiding these specific types of decisions for growth and annexation are contrary to this, and this was also pointed out in the report. Yet you say you have to throw those away. I mean, that's an inconsistency. Those policies were put down for a reason, as my predecessors have spoken about, and I think you'll find many Solvang residents want us to stick to those and not change the general plan or its guidance. Prior to development in the northeast area, the city will also have those significant costs of building up infrastructures and also for the parks. The revenue flows, however, for the institutional uses will be zero for income and negative for outflow expenses. So we're looking at a negative outflow there. We're looking at a negative outflow for parks and recreation. We're looking at substantial investment into parks. We have to buy land and do all sorts of things, and I realize that there can be cost sharing and gifts, but as a whole, those things are tied together, and I believe those parcels will come out to be found to be tied together, and so we have to look at the whole picture and see what the whole picture and bottom line is. So my time is up, and so I'll...
Thank you, Linda. Denise Cornwell, please. And Lisa Novat is next.
My name is Denise. I'm going to be passing because most of my views have been already spoken by other people. So to give somebody else more time, I'm going to go ahead and pass.
Thanks very much, Denise. Noted that you agree with the other people. Lisa? And then Hank Holmberg is up next.
My name is Lisa Novat. My husband and I reside at Happy End Ranch. Our ranch is just outside Solvang on the south side of the river, directly behind proposed development area 1. We're right behind Buell Flat Rocks. You may have seen some of my pastures from Highway 246. We are concerned that if any of these proposed scenarios go through, it will be the start of the end of the equestrian corridor on Highway 246 between Solvang and Buellton. That stretch of highway is beautiful and unique to our valley. While we believe that landowners have a right to develop their land, as my husband and I have done, We believe it should be done with what has already been established in the vicinity. This is a long-established equine community with grapes intermingled. Should this land need to be developed in the future, we would ask that a portion or the entirety be developed with equestrian use in mind. There is a shortage of equestrian housing as urban sprawl expands. Ranchettes with public trails and an equestrian center can be a lucrative endeavor for both developers and landowners. I would ask at your convenience just to Google equestrian communities. I think you will find some interesting literature. Briefly, I've looked over the SOI and noticed there has been no traffic congestion study to date. The traffic between Buellton and Solvang can be so congested at times now it can take 30 or 40 minutes to go a few miles, not to mention the danger factor. I live off of Highway 246, and for me too, it can take at least 10 minutes to get out. And I'm concerned about my teenage daughters getting out on the highway at night. I have lived in this valley for 27 years and have embraced my community and the good life we have here. I hope we can reach a consensus and see the forest for the deodar trees. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Hank Holmberg, please. And Susan Baloney is next.
Yeah, good evening, Commission, and all the residents that showed up here tonight. I want to take a minute and pray to the Solvang Mermaid and the Vikings that are around us that this doesn't happen like Disneyland plan. The biggest thing for me is that that plan had nothing on vehicular traffic, how many cars and how many potential residents could actually be the result of that study, which to me seems like a big thing. Everybody's mentioning traffic. 246 is probably the weakest infrastructure we have in our area. And because of it, it's affecting neighborhoods like Skip Mesa, Chalk Hill, Friedensburg Canyon, Viborg, and Alisal Road, which are now freeways. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but we have a real speeding problem on Chalk Hill right now. Area 1 on that western side of Solvang is a gateway area called the Hay Flats. If that turns into something that looks like Buellton or industrial park, I'd be really sad, to be honest. But you're going to do what you're going to do. I hope the state doesn't get involved because, like someone said, if the state happens to get involved in this and we annex it, then we will have a lot of high-density housing, and there's nothing we can do about it. And then also, our sheriff's contract is up right now. City of Solvang has one sheriff's deputy for the whole city of Solvang, which leads to no patrol or very little patrol and absolutely zero traffic enforcement. If we're going to grow, we better look at that contract real careful because it's up for contract review right now. We better add a few more sheriff's officers to City of Solvang. And that's about all I have to say. Like I said, I hope it doesn't happen. I thought the study was Pollyanna, and I think wasn't realistic. And if you live in the valley, you should be able to write a study like that. But if you don't know the area and you don't know the situation we live in day to day here. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Susan? And then Della's up next, please.
Commissioners and staff, thank you for this opportunity. Mayor Richardson was right last year at the May 22nd council meeting when he asked, should we have workshops? In response to public frustration that we didn't know what an SOI or annexation was all about. But instead, Mr. Deuce replied, let's do this. Let's eliminate the mission parcels. And so a vote was taken to eliminate the mission parcels from the SOI study, and no mention of workshops was ever spoken again. Citizens are only getting 4 hearings in 3 minutes each to discuss this huge proposal. Something this big needed resident input at the very beginning. We needed a visioning process for Solvang like the Valley has done. Instead, the committee that produced the economic development strategy, who wanted an SOI study, was composed of the city planning staff and the Solvang Chamber of Commerce's real estate committee. Did they have the residents in mind or the businesses? We residents are sort of like the ingredient in the recipe that got left out. Other cities have figured this out, and I'll get to that at the end. Unfortunately for residents also, the way LAFCO process is set up, only City Council, the parcel owners in the study, and LAFCO itself get to vote. How many people among these groups, other than City Council, actually live in Solvang? It could be that a dozen people or so will make this decision for the 5,000 residents of Solvang. You might call this annexation without adequate representation. And to add insult to injury, the consultant says that their proposal includes an economy of public meetings. They also say workshops may be needed during the Task 3 land use alternative stage before the first Planning Commission meeting. What happened? They proposed workshops for the parcel owners. What about the residents? Lastly, you probably know that other towns in California have realized the fact that citizens don't get to vote in LAFCO annexations unless they're the parcel owners, and so those voters did something about it. Ventura County, for example, has their SOAR initiative since 1995. How's it worked out? We've been told that half the time annexations are approved and half the time they aren't. This surely seems reasonable. Buellton, too, now has an urban growth boundary where anytime someone proposes land to be annexed outside their boundary, the citizens get to vote on it. 38 towns in Northern California have a vote on annexations. We need a vote, too. I read that charter cities get to create their own voting procedures, so let's do it. I'm sorry that this has come to planning without a public workshop and with no vote ahead of us. I think you should stop right now and ask for a public workshop as your recommendation to council. To me, nothing else makes sense at this point. Thank you.
Della and Mark. Mark Olivas is up next.
I'm Della Kasberg, also known as Muffy. I'm a 61-year resident of the San Ynez Valley. My kids, our family and kids came back and were raised here, finished their high school here. The explanation of the consultants that the council is taking a longer look at future options, it seems lulls us into a sense of there isn't anything urgent about this. This is going to take a long time and we have nothing to worry about. It begs the question of whether this is a study that the citizens of the community are interested in at all. In overriding their present general plan, it effectively does away with all of the things that were worked very hard on to establish a general plan. The unmet needs of the city and workforce housing are enviable and very altruistic concerns. We need to be concerned about that. Presently, Lompoc and Buellton and Los Alamos are more affordable cities than ours. But it is a fact that whenever we have built, we don't find that affordable housing is necessarily affordable housing. It's a market force. Any more than building more commercial property is going to lower the price of the value of commercial property rental. It's a wonderful ideal, but in reality, we work in market forces and it doesn't happen. Affordable housing in the San Ynez Valley started out a few years ago with Rancho de Maria over 20 years ago. It was $99,000 to $104,000 housing that is now $400,000 and $500,000 to $700,000 housing. It's what the market will bear. It's not affordable housing for a workforce. The housing costs, we're not talking urban renewal in Solvang when we're talking about meeting the needs of our workforce. We have a lovely community. We want to keep it that way. We're fortunate if our children are able to find work and come back here and build their families here, and they are. It takes hard work, but they're coming back because they want to be in the community they were raised in, and I hope that it continues that way. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Mark, you're up next. Is Mark here? Is it Olivas or Olives? I can't read. Sorry. There's 26 letters in the alphabet. I can't know them all.
I don't know how to write them yet, I guess. My name is Mark Oliver, and I live in just outside of Solvang, but within the proposed future sphere of influence. And I've already provided you with my letter, a longer letter in the packet. While I recognize that the physical impact is yet to be done, the study, annexation is nonetheless clearly going to be very, very expensive, as others have noted. I urge the Planning Commission to reject the findings of the study and recommend to the City Council the proposal to increase the city's sphere of influence and annex adjacent properties is ill-advised and be dropped from consideration. What is proposed is not in the best interest of the community. Many parts of the proposal are in direct conflict with the longstanding, as you've heard, county policies, specific measures found in the community plan, Solvang general policies, and the Solvang Greenbelt resolution adopted in 2000. But interestingly, the study created by the consultant team provides ample evidence as to why the city should not proceed. For instance, please note that Part 3, City Services and Constraints on page 24, they note significant impacts, including the need for more water, an expansion of wastewater treatment plant, additional staffing and equipment by fire and law enforcement agencies, development that could necessitate significant roadway improvements to maintain an acceptable level of service into the future. But on page 57, the flaws really become apparent. Significant urban development in either expansion area will require the expansion of city services concurrently or in advance of the development. Development of water-intensive land uses will require significant investment in additional water. This is from their study. The extension of public services could be extension of public services to expansion areas could be financially prohibitive. Urban development in either study area could adversely compete with existing villages, businesses in the village. Urban development on prime ag land would be inconsistent with the policies of the conservation open space element. And obviously both annex studies lie along important gateways to the city. I'll stop there. We could talk about LAFCO, but in summary, the proposal encourages the expansion of the city and expanding sprawl beyond logical geographic boundaries that already exist. Although this proposal may expand the city council's jurisdiction, it does not constitute good planning. Left without documentation are the tremendous additional costs to the taxpayers of Solvang. Let's not take leave of our senses and relive the state water project, boondoggle, and catastrophe for the voters and taxpayers of Solvang. Let's stop this now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Stephanie? And then Nancy Emerson is next.
Good evening. I'm Stephanie Statham. I've lived in Solvang for 24 years. I live in the 1930s house my Danish grandparents built. I'm here tonight to express my concern over the idea of business development in the fields that line the west entrance to Solvang. I'm not a fan of the new shopping center in Buellton on the northeast corner of 246 and McMurray Road. The buildings are so close to the road, obliterating what once was a beautiful field where you could see the ridge of the hills to the north. And navigating through there now is a nightmare. I would hate to see those kinds of ugly buildings and asphalt infiltrate one of the very few vistas that actually expresses the very name of Solvang, which literally means sunny valley. These fields are cherished by many. If there is no way to stop development, I hope you will consider leaving a greater portion of it undeveloped, especially on either side of the highway, so that whenever we get rain, it can be absorbed into the ground, and that wildlife is allowed access to cross from one side to the other. I want to be able to see the hills. And to me, there's got to be an alternative to just asphalt, which is so ugly. The last thing I want to see there are buildings and pavement, stoplights, cars backed up, traffic stalled further back into Buellton, and no view of the hills. Please be very careful and mindful of what you allow there. Consider consequences. Please do not allow this area to become an extension of the Disneyland-type tourist trap, which is the center of Solvang, which is how I see Solvang now. It's like Disneyland, which is very frustrating for myself and many locals who who live, and I live on the lower half of Solvang also. Just to get out of town is ridiculous. And I have to deal with that every day. I have to worry about where I'm going to park if I leave my house. And so it's already so dangerous to navigate through town in a car and on foot. I would hate to see that get worse by expanding into the fields, so beautiful fields over there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephanie. Nancy Emerson.
Thank you for having public comment tonight. In an earlier memo to you, I discussed agricultural land, traffic, water, and wastewater sections of the consultant's land use report. If I understand correctly, your responsibility tonight is to make recommendations to City Council regarding appropriate land uses within the potential SOI annexation. You are to do a reality check, which includes reference to the general plan. You've been offered 4 possible scenarios for the western and northeastern areas. Please remember that 1 and 3 emphasize property owner interests. Buyers or inheritors of agricultural land in the valley have a right to use or sell it for agricultural uses. Ownership does not give them a right to rezoning for other uses, including development and profit beyond its agricultural value, especially here where preservation of ag land is a priority. I ask you to consider the following land use questions when evaluating each zoning designation in the scenarios. 1, will new zoning negate current city and county policies protecting the ag lands surrounding Solvang? 2, will new zoning add new traffic to the already impacted 246 corridor? 3, will new zoning negatively impact Solvang's ability to meet its water needs and survive drought? 4, will new zoning add dangers in flood zones? If a new zoning eliminates prime agricultural land, adds new traffic, uses more water, or exacerbates flooding, given the constraints identified in the land use report and your general plan, it should not be pursued further. I recommend that the consultant's fiscal report be limited to parcels that pass this reality check. In my review of the scenarios, the only one I think merits fiscal analysis is the portion of the western area currently in an SOI with industrial and commercial zoning in both the city and the county. The proposed new commercial service zone, if carefully described, can complement the industrial zone and prevent duplication of business uses elsewhere in the city. There is space for more development there that will benefit the city economically, and it can be screened from 246 viewers. Users will primarily be current Valley residents, and all or much of the area has city water already. Given our county's recent experience with flooding, please recommend RC, resource conservation for the SOI's lower area. Thank you.
Well said, Nancy. Thank you. John Camp. And then Ron Griffin is up next.
John Camp, thank you for the opportunity. First of all, I'd like to say that I started coming into town in 1964 with my grandparents, my parents, and we loved being in town. We loved the surrounding area, and throughout the years I've been able to visit the area. And 50 years later, I'm a homeowner, and I never thought that the land surrounding this town would ever be in jeopardy. We've seen what's happened to Buellton. We've seen the casino. And there's nothing I could do about that because I'm new here. But from my heart, I would just like everybody to know that any changes, almost any change, especially taking away pristine farmland and the gateway to the city, would be a complete tragedy. The traffic, as it is, that's one thing I've noticed that has changed over the years, is almost unbearable, but any more would be unbearable. One thing I've noticed about living up here is that there's a water shortage, and I'm not sure how we can even get along with the water we now have with the demand that we have. I heard earlier that this report could be looked at as advice, and although I can't be objective, I'm very subjective about protecting the area. There are some things in here that sound encouraging, and if you don't mind, I'd like to just briefly emphasize those. Development of existing vacant land on non-open space and non-prime agricultural land within an agency's boundaries is encouraged prior, where we're at now, prior to further annexation and development. So I think if there is a drastic need, that we need to look at what we can do now without annexation. Let's do what we can with what we have first. Portions of the western and northwest study areas contain prime agricultural soils and provide an important, emphasize important, scenic gateway to the city. The surrounding area is as important as the city itself in its uniqueness and its beauty. Couple of quick things here. It may be fairly argued that development on prime agricultural land is not in the public interest. This is the study, this is the advice that this report is putting forward. In addition, portions of the western study area are on gently to steeply sloping hillsides. Portions of each study area contain prime farmland. Development of the land in the western study area may conflict with the city's informal Greenbelt agreement with the city of Buellton. So the end result is whatever we do, we don't want to lose what we have. And it's getting close to that with traffic, with water demand, and with growth in general. And this is one of the few areas that we can now protect. And there's very few left in California.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Ron Griffin, please. And then Kerry McKinnon is up next.
My name is Ron Griffin. I've been a resident of this area for about 43 years. I agree with everything that's been said, and I hope that you take it to heart. I think that an RV park and the gateway coming in is not the way to show what a beautiful town this is. Thank you.
Thank you. Kerry, and then Ken Hoff is up next.
Hi, Carrie McKinnon. I am a Solvang resident, have been for 19 years. And I will make this really brief. I agree with nearly everything that was said here. But I feel that there's something that isn't coming up with these questions. As far as why are we doing this? And Mr. Peterson has mentioned that the city wants control in case something else happens. And our consultant has said that there might be a plan to build a church, but he's not sure. It seems to me that if there are proposals going before the county for these currently non-Solvang parcels, why don't we know exactly what they are, and why isn't that part of our information packet here? I just think that's really important, and I think that needs to come out. Thank you.
Thank you. Ken?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Ken Huff, and I'm the staff for the Santa Barbara County Action Network. For 16 years, we've worked to promote social and economic justice, preserve our environmental and agricultural land, and to create sustainable communities. On behalf of my board, which is from all around this county, and membership that includes several here in Solvang and all throughout the county, I can tell you I strongly agree with the preponderance, or really all of the comments that I've heard tonight, especially Susan Baloney's call for workshops. I mean, the idea that we all get 3 minutes and that's it, you're done. Workshops can really be productive, I think, are the way to go. I was going to agree with Lansing Duncan's comments, but he hasn't spoken yet, but I've read his letter, and it's terrific. I agree with everything he said, and especially the gateway comments. I live in Santa Maria, and for years, even before that, I'd come to Solvang, and you're in the tunnel of the trees, and then you come out of that, and there's this beautiful green on both sides. These days, the green is especially pleasant to look at. And then you come into town. So it's beautiful, and the idea that could be a lot of single-family houses is pretty dreadful. We need workforce housing. We strongly support it. Out of the 334 acres that are considered in these scenarios, there's only 5 in one scenario and 9 acres in another that are suggested for workforce housing. And I'm pretty sure the city could find those few acres of infill to meet those needs. So I urge your commission to recommend that the council cut its losses and shelve this ill-conceived idea. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Ken. All right, at this point, I'm going to close the public comment section. Pardon me, we have somebody else like to speak?
I submitted 2 speakers.
My apologies, I don't have one. Come on up. The first one.
Yeah. Thanks.
What's your name again,
I
Lansing?
appreciate the opportunity to bookend this meeting. Okay. Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak this evening. I think what your commission has found is that the City Council has opened a Pandora's box. And it's a Pandora's box for a number of reasons. One of it, obviously, is the very real concern you've heard on the part of citizens. The other is that if you simply ask property owners, please give me your wish list, you will not necessarily end up with what the city needs or what is really a worthwhile trade-off for priceless assets. And when I speak of that, I'm speaking of your gateways. They are priceless. So many communities in California have lost these gateways that define them. And that really is what makes Solvang such a magical place. You know, people have spoken disparagingly here about Solvang as Anaheim, and I don't agree entirely with that. I live in Solvang. I don't think it's Anaheim, but one of the reasons it is not Anaheim, there's no doubt about it, is its rural setting. Okay. And that rural setting is prized by all Valley residents. Every time there's been any sort of planning process, they repeatedly say, we live in a rural community and that's the way we want to keep it. And that's why the community plan was so focused on having those buffers and gateways. And your own policies basically say, make sure the county keeps this green and open space next to our gateway. Well, you're running the risk of losing those because of your own driven process. And that brings me to something that I've heard voiced by a few people, and that is this really unjustified concern about the county, establishing the county as some sort of boogeyman, that you wouldn't have control over what was happening around you. So let's just step back and look at the track record. So the track record since the city has become incorporated is the county has pretty much protected the area surrounding you and kept it rural. And the only thing that I see that's really been a marked change in terms of that boundary is when the county gave you Sunnyfields Park and did not oppose annexation and its use as a park, supported that. Okay, So it really, from a county perspective, I say this is adding insult to injury. You've taken this, and now it's a leapfrog point to go into sprawl up the Alamo Pintado corridor. And for myself, there's only one way I could describe the idea of having an RV park in the Alamo Pintado corridor: a crime. Okay. This is one of those areas that is so special. Just as the same is true on the other entry.
Thank you.
Then I do want to say also,
Briefly.
I can shed some light on the discussion about whether a church may or may not occur on the parcel that's in the northeastern area. In fact, the church applied, well, actually it was a pre-application letter that they went to the county for. You can get this if you want to find out about things, in 2015. And Holly has a copy of the letter that the county sent back. It's 16 pages long. That's because if you get a major CUP in the county on ag land, it takes a lot of work. And they were going to be required to put up a sizable amount of money to begin with. And also, they were told that there were all of these potential inconsistencies, may be consistent. You know, they were given the range of issues that they would have to deal with, told that maybe they could get a mitigated negative declaration, but maybe it would be an EIR. So they have the option to pursue that under the county, but they've chosen not to.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to address the council, the commission?
I just have one question.
Come on up, state your name.
Pamela Harris. And my question is simply, you're being asked to give some kind of recommendation to the city council whether you feel this study should go to the next phase. Is that correct?
Yeah.
As the planning commission, that's what we're here tonight for.
Yes,
You're
we don't
listening
say
to
yes
us.
or no. We approve things to go to the council for their authorization and
Right,
their
but
approval.
you make a recommendation like we
Correct.
feel like, because I just wonder, and I'm not trying to be rude, but we know what was spent to date. So if it were to go forward, what would the financial, does anyone know what the financial commitment would be to the city of Solvang and taxpayers?
I don't know the exact dollar amount, no.
Roughly,
The
I
city,
mean,
the city
the
council would be the
gentleman-
one who would answer that question.
I thought I heard the word six figures.
Correct.
That was for a whole annexation process way
That
in the
was, that's
future.
what
not
my
the
question,
fiscal
so
study.
that's not, so we don't know what the cost going forward is. That's something that they would present to the city council? Is
And
that
the
how that
council would vote on that.
Okay. So there is an opportunity for people here also to go to a city council meeting.
Yeah,
and
this
ask
is,
that.
there's 4 more meetings about,
Yeah.
about 3 more meetings about this item.
Yeah.
This is just the start.
Okay.
Thank you very much. One more speaker? State your name, please.
Jeff Lockwood. I own the property west of Section 1, Bella Cavalli. And unfortunately, I've never been noticed on any of these projects. I've been a resident here for 15 years, and I actually had a neighbor email me about it. And then I did get it, but I got the notice, and I just got it 3 days ago. So as far as I know, I believe that there is some noticing requirements of events like this to take place. With it, maybe not. Nope, nothing on it.
Public notice.
Yeah, this is not a project, so those types of noticing requirements aren't.
With it. I know that the concern, I just feel a lot of this project is putting the cart before the horse here. You have a lot of, I think most of the influence of the development is based off of owners' desires and wants and needs. Me coming out of the development industry, understand that. I believe in growth, but I believe in controlled growth with it. I developed out of Santa Barbara a lot, back east, Nevada. The process of this seems wrong. With it, you talked about the sphere of influence and the control of it. All that's happening is if you take over this property, as that sphere then can start stepping back out, then what becomes the worry about the next property to mine? Then my property becomes the concern with it, and you can keep going on and on and on. There's no stop to that theory behind it. the gateway to the community is a huge part of this. I think the design, the development, and the desire of the specific projects are ill-conceived and really developer 101 type. This is too beautiful of an area to put an RV park, to do workforce housing right at the beginning. Financial concerns of what's this going to bring in, how much housing and how long that was brought up is a huge point. Why do this if we don't need to do it? If there is a demand need for it now or within a 5-10 year period, I think that should be brought forth to the public and the public to have some input on that. If we're not there, why are we doing this with it? And other than that, I believe in the growth. I think there can be some controlled growth, but this project I totally disagree with.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to address the commission? At this time, we'll close this to public hearing and go back to discuss and questions of staff. The discussion will start. Gay, do you want to start?
Sure.
Where do you start?
Sure. Okay, well, first I want to say thank you, everybody. It's been a long meeting. I'm really happy to see all of you who are here, and I have to agree that I, too, agree with most of what I've heard tonight. That's been my reaction to the whole study. That said, the Planning Commission has a responsibility here to our City Council, and our City Council has requested and funded a feasibility study. And we, as a Planning Commission, are obligated to make recommendations concerning the scenarios that are presented in the feasibility study and get those recommendations to the City Council. Well, no, get them back to the consultants so they can do the fiscal impacts analysis. Because without the whole feasibility study and the fiscal impact analysis, the City Council can't make any decision about whether or not to go forward. I mean, all of you have noted, or a lot of you have noted, that there are many, many, many constraints within our general plan and also within the LAFCO procedure that would prevent us going any further with this. I think there's more things in the study that are unfavorable to pursuing this than are favorable. But again, the City Council is going to make the decision, and they can't do that without completing the study and the fiscal impact analysis. So we've got to decide as a commission what we're going to recommend regarding the types of scenarios that ought to be included in that fiscal impact analysis. I had some ideas of what I would recommend, which I'm not sure I want to do at this point, but I can go ahead with that so the rest of the commissioners can hear what I was thinking we could do. But I am real concerned about including even some of these because I certainly don't want to open the door to development in some of these beautiful areas we have on our boundaries either. So, let's see. We have to remember that whatever we recommend will not obligate either the city or the property owners to going forward with that type of development. So that's something everybody needs to keep in mind. So for the Western Study area, when I look at scenario 1 and scenario 2, I definitely preferred scenario 2 because it had far less density of development and it had some commercial services which Solvang really does need for some additional revenue sources. If Solvang as a city doesn't have these revenue sources, you and I as residents will see an increase in our taxes because we need to keep our city funded. And we're not talking about city salaries and things like that. I've never seen a city with as small and efficient a staff as Solvang seems to have. There's only like 35 people on staff in the whole city. So that's what we're not talking about a revenue stream for that. We're talking about replacing the revenue that we might lose from total occupancy taxes when there's a downturn in the economy or when Highway 101 is closed and none of our businesses, none of our hotels are filled. What happens there is then we have a shortfall and can't pay for the things that are in our city budget. So the other thing is design residential for workforce housing. That's a real need, and it's something that the state is going to force on us. They're constantly looking for more affordable housing. You'll constantly see articles in the newspapers about this. You'll see what the state legislature is up to, trying to find ways to put more affordable housing in place, and we need to find room for it. So what I was going to suggest is modifying scenario 2 to take out the 7R1 and the 3E1 development. I don't think we need that. I don't think we can support that with water in particular. We all know that we are in drought again. We're in severe drought again, I believe, or at extensive drought. I don't know. We're next to the worst right now. And we already know that we're going to experience hotter climate, longer term drought. And I just don't think the city is going to be able to afford to purchase more water, even if it was available for purchase. And one of the things that the feasibility study didn't address was the new groundwater sustainability agency, which has been formed for the Eastern Management District of the Santa Ynez River groundwater basin. A very, very small portion of that basin underlies Solvang. In fact, it doesn't underlie it. It's on the boundary where the Alamo Pintado Creek runs. And we already heard from somebody, I can't remember who it was now, but that the wells on the flats go dry for part of the year unless there's a Kachuma release. And Kachuma is only 39% full and we're going into a drought. We are in a drought. So that's going to be a problem. That whole western area probably isn't going to get water from wells there, and it's probably not going to get more state water either. Our current state water allocation for this year is only going to be 20% of what we're entitled to. So I'd like to see no development, no residential development there. I think we can expand the industrial business park and the commercial services uses in the existing sphere of influence in the Western Study area. Perhaps we can make room for some design residential maybe on the other side of the highway, but I would like to see both sides of 246 stay green and open. So any development moved away from the boundaries of the highway. That way our gateway into the city isn't impacted. Okay, so that's it for the western area pretty much. In the northeast study area, of the two scenarios presented, I would prefer scenario 3 because there is a greater area for recreational use and it's adjacent to Sunnyfields Park. To me, that makes sense. Not an RV park. I don't want to see that either. An RV park was probably suggested by the consultants because they can be built in flood zones, and we can't do much else with our flood zone areas. That said, I don't think it's a very attractive thing to put in a city gateway. And I would like to see, and our general plan does say, that we don't have enough open space and parks for our citizens. And I think it would be a nice idea to be able to expand Sunnyfields Park further. And that would give us still open space coming into the city. You know, I just assume leave the other parcels out of this thing. Both the institutional and the agricultural tourism. I mean, I don't think we need them, and if the county is going to continue to follow the community, Santa Ynez community plan, then I don't think we have to worry about losing those agricultural lands. I was kind of shocked to see what the county will allow in an Ag 1 zoned area. I was looking at the other permitted land uses in those areas, but if the community plan takes precedence, then I suppose we don't have to worry about those. But what I have seen is that it would allow among many other uses, mining, agricultural processing, utility scale photovoltaic facilities, composting facilities, wastewater treatment facilities, country clubs, fairgrounds, meeting facilities, schools, and sports and outdoor recreation facilities, which that last is okay. But I don't know if you're all aware, but the Santa Ynez Community Services District did a recycled water facilities plan that was published in May of 2017, and it includes 3 proposed sites for a wastewater treatment plant to produce recycled water. And one of those sites, Site B, is located in the northeast study area, adjacent to 2 of Solvang's water wells and very close to existing homes in at that end of Solvang, just the side of Sunnyfields Park. Boy, I sure wouldn't like to not see that there, and if we could at least include this portion of scenario 3 that is currently shown as a recreation area, then I'd like to see us do that and get control of that area so we can prevent something else from going in there that we wouldn't want. So those are my suggestions, and I'd like to hear what everybody else has to say.
Thank you, Gay. Aaron?
Gay, can I just ask a question on your western figures? You were looking at scenario 2, taking out the 7R1, taking out the 3E1, taking out the DR.
Actually, I wish I had a picture. I'd like to put, and there's no commercial services in here either, even though some exist in this area.
Correct.
I'd like to see all that moved down and put all 3 of those, well, what's existing can't be moved, but move everything back from here. We could put some DR here, but move it back from the highway, so it can't be seen so readily.
Gotcha. Okay, I just want to clarify.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does. Okay, my comments. I'm more scared of the county than some folks are, evidently. And Lansing Duncan knows them better than I do, but I see a 2-2 vote a lot in a 3rd district split, and it could go easily the other way, and who knows what would happen to a lot of our areas in the county. Folks might not trust city governance anymore, so maybe the county is where the land ought to stay, and that we would have a voice there. I find having a voice here, I mean, I was born and raised here, born here in 1961, when I came back. I've been here a long time. I just feel that we have a good voice here at city government, and I've dealt with county government before on different issues, and it doesn't ever let me feel really good about having a voice. Having said that, I'm amazed at a meeting that you would have Lansing here and Bob Fields speaking on the same as Rod Simmons and Jim Hancock. I mean, that's kind of an interesting group that they all agree on the same basic issues here. We Watch is here also, which is it's a very interesting cross the aisle hands, and I think that shows a lot of respect and a lot of commonality that people feel a love for the valley and love for the city of Solvang. There's a lot of folks in the audience that aren't city of Solvang residents, and I don't think that matters at all. A lot of people will say it does. We're such a small little community that everybody has an equal say, and what happens in Buellton affects us, and happens outside of city of Solvang affects us, and so we're all in this really together. I want to put a couple things in perspective on traffic. My feelings only. It's terrible on State Street. It's terrible on Cabrillo Boulevard. It's terrible on 154. I came over 154 a couple weeks ago during the mudslides, and it was like high school. You could have passed cars if there weren't any cars on it. I mean, Buell Flat is terrible. Carpinteria is terrible. Traffic has become awful. It's not the city of Solvang's fault. If you looked at the growth that took place in the last 20 years, 10 years for certain, it's east and west of the valley, and we're just an hourglass, and it all comes right through. We've taken off the bypasses. I'm not in favor of bypasses, but we have had zero say, I would say zero say in what goes on in Buellton over the decades. Not a criticism, it's just that it all comes through here. We have a high school at one end of the valley, we got development at the other end, we got housing projects at one end, we have a casino at the other end, and it all comes right through Solvang. And those that live on the north-south of Solvang and have to use the 246 corridor, I feel terrible. I do it. raised my 4 kids here, and they contributed to all the traffic, as do a lot of folks that come visit Solvang. But we're not immune to it. I mean, other places are not immune to it. Everybody is facing it. City of Solvang is going to need a retail base. Every city needs a retail base. We could have a tire factory. We could have a nuclear power plant. We could have a prison. We could have strip malls. We could just be a housing development for the city of Goleta or Santa Maria or Lompoc. We have a pretty vital economic base here. We should be appreciative of it. TOT tax brings in 50 or 60% of our income. I know that it's a terrible mess to have all the traffic come through town, but tourism is a pretty clean industry. They go away a lot. They're gone on the weekends a lot. And I don't know what other industry we would have. Just a comment. I think that there is infill that we could do in the city of Solvang without annexing, way before we get to the point of annexing. I think there's lots of commercial. I think that there's lots of residential. When I look at the study, and by the way, the FEMA and David Foote is not to be faulted for their study. They were asked to do the study. Chamber's not at fault. Either are the property owners in this. They didn't push this. City Council threw it out there of should we annex and should we look at economic development, and do we trust the county to do it correctly, or do we trust us? And we don't know till we ask the questions, and you can't really fault anyone for asking the questions. You can certainly fault the answers, but the questions need to be asked and the discussions need to take place. And you can attack the process, but not the motives behind the people. The church, Ranch Church, has no motivation in this as far as I know, and I'm fairly good friends with those folks. So they weren't driving this either. Buell Flat certainly wasn't driving it, as you heard it, and the other Peterson families, no relationship to me, were driving this. I believe that this process starts, though, with a small movement, and it is really innocent of us to believe that just by passing on to City Council that we have no effect, because I believe we have a big effect. I think that it has a life of its own. And once it's out there and it's printed and it's there, then people point back to it just like we point to the Valley Blueprint 25, 10, 15 years later. So it does. It has a life of its own. And there is a build it and they will come scenario. I believe that. You zone things into residential, and the state of California, as somebody aptly pointed out, will say, go ahead and you've got to take some more housing because now you have the land, and we haven't infilled our land that we have. And I think that we've done a pretty good job in the city of Solvang. I'd have to ask our planning director where we are. I know we were out of sorts about 5 or 10 years ago, but we've rezoned some things, infilled, and I think that we're doing a pretty good job on it. I fear state housing. I fear that they would come. I don't fear the state coming in and tell us to do more. I think that we draw a line in the sand and we say we're not going to do more. I do not fear that we're losing economic growth to other places and we're losing an economic base. I think we have a strong economic base and we can do more with what we have without having to say, oh my gosh, all this growth is going elsewhere and we're in a panic situation that we need to do more. I would personally annex it and leave it all as ag. Obviously, I'm hearing that LAFCO would laugh at us and say you can't do that. But yeah, Gay's proposal is pretty close to that. It's leaving the north corridor on Alamo Pintado basically alone, other than taking one of the parcels and putting it into perhaps out of ag and into rec for expansion. I really don't want to see that happen either. As far as the west, I don't want to see any housing on the west. I don't want to see any additional industrial growth on the west. If I look at the map, unless I'm reading it wrong, how it currently is zoned is that it is zoned industrial. And there is no commercial, but there is industrial down there. My vote would be to annex it, all ag, and that's the end of it. Or not annex it at all. So I don't know if I'm going to even vote tonight. I'm probably going to vote no on passing any recommendations on, and maybe I will be criticized for that, but that's how I feel. I don't want to see the process go further at this time. But anyway, that's how I feel when I read it. And again, I'm not faulting David Foote and his crew. There's just, I don't see the need. I don't see the end. And in the staff, it's not just me how I feel. I don't see the conclusion. And I know you're not concluding, David, but there's enough things in there that they will only let you annex if you show all these things. And you have to have the resources, as was aptly pointed out. And I just don't see us having that. So those are my feelings.
Thank you, Aaron. Jack?
Well, I pretty much agree with Gay's proposal on the western end. I'd like to see, if we went ahead with this, not so much residential development. When I read this, I was a little surprised that there would be so much residential development in there. On the northeastern part, I don't have strong feelings about that either way. I'd be willing to let that go completely. I think we could do some commercial development on the western edge, but I don't know if we have to go ahead to the city council, and I think we should, since we were asked to do that and make a recommendation. But that would be my recommendation, for less residential development on the west, do nothing on the north, and more commercial development on the west.
Okay, and lastly, and I'll be brief, I'm 60 years old, and I'm the vice president and secretary of the Danish Brotherhood in Solvang, and I'm the youngest member in the group, and I'm not Danish, but no young Danes can afford to live in this town and go to the meetings. They've all moved. I don't want housing on the west side of this town. Yet I also don't want the state to be shoving things down our throats in the future. This is a study only. No one is trying to get us to annex anything right now, and no developer, as it was eloquently put, is waiting in the wings. I recognize an awful lot of the same faces in this room when we tried to do the low-income housing on Pine Street, that people were against that. When we tried to convert an old building to a 3-story hotel, it's the same people that don't want anything built in this town, but we all want nice things, and we all want business. And my biggest concern with this whole valley is this hourglass that Aaron talked about, that we're so squeezed by Buellton and San Ynez, and they're killing us. And the biggest issue we have is that road. I know talking about traffic here is redundant, but I just don't want, I'm really, really, really mixed, folks. And I don't want more houses here, and I still want that. I mean, my office looks out at that field, and it's a beautiful field. We're selfish, and we're spoiled. We don't want any sort of Temecula rubbing off on this valley. I think it's already rubbed off on Buellton, and I think we're suffering a lot of the consequences of what Buellton chooses to do. And half the stuff that we do in this valley is based on what Buellton and San Ynez do, and the tour buses, et cetera. So we're supposed to make decisions here, and I'm really mixed, because I don't want any homes being built under a cliff off the highway. I like the fact that it's still ag, but I really don't. If I was to do anything, I would go for scenario 2 and 4. But it's a tough call, and it's, like I said, this is the first step of a four meeting process. The city council brought this up. They've asked us to make our comments known. You guys have certainly made your comments known, and we appreciate it. And I knew this was the way it was going to be, because we're asking, people think we're going to be developing this place, and I don't think that's going to happen for a long time. I think the city is doing their diligence, that they have to look at options, or they wouldn't be doing their jobs. So with that said,
just a question: we are not married to pick these 4 scenarios?
No, there can be a scenario 6, 7, 8, and 9 too. This is the first step in this process. So, would anybody like to make a suggestion, other than telling me to shut up, what to do?
I have one more question.
Yes?
Can we just pick a few of the land use scenarios? Or do we have to pick a land use scenario in one study area or the other in order for you to do the financial impacts?
You can, am I on here? Let's see, here we go. If I understand your question, can you mix and match or can you just limit it? Yes. Well, the way I understand your comments earlier is that scenario that is on the screen, you would favor going forward with the business park, the commercial service, and the DR. The rest should be ag.
I would get rid of this, and I would move all
Yeah,
this
that's what I'm gonna
down
ask.
and smaller.
Okay, yeah, I got it.
And I would guess I would leave the resource
Yes.
conservation.
So I have a question for you. Would you, vis-a-vis Commissioner Peterson, propose to annex the rest of that land and keep it ag? Or simply limit the annexation to those properties that you just pointed to? And let me throw one more thing in there before you answer. Because we talked about this amongst ourselves in the team here. And one of the persons that spoke, Lisa, Lisa brought up the idea of an equestrian community.
Mhm.
And we tossed around that idea and tried to figure out what that was, because we were trying to envision an agricultural land use that was consistent with what was there. And the A10 is kind of that you see up there, 10-acre ag parcels. They could be, the top button? Oh. Blinded myself. So this A10 area, the idea there was to create smaller ag parcels that could be more of the gentleman farmer equestrian. So since she brought that up and threw it out, I thought I'd connect that dot for you and then say, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking of not small parcels. I'm thinking of agricultural land the way it is.
And not
if it's
not
at all
study it.
possible. Yeah.
Carve it out, leave it in the county? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah. I mean,
Seek
the only reason we would want to include it in a sphere of influence and annex it is so that we would make sure of that as a city. But I'm not sure we have to do that. I'm hearing that most of the people here don't want us to pursue an SOI expansion and annexation.
That's good. I just needed that clarification.
Well, but an SOI is different, obviously, than annexation. We already have that. I mean, I would love our SOI to go further, because at least they would have to arguably chat with us if the county goes through things. And I would really love to strengthen our Greenbelt agreement with Buellton, which I don't know how we do that, but that, I mean, come on, in a perfect world, to me, that whole thing would remain open as it is as a Greenbelt all the way across. That's just my opinion of it. I don't know how you strengthen that unless we trust the county's going to do that, or we trust that our agreement with Buellton is going to be strengthened, and that we're all vigilant and we go to all the meetings all the time. I suppose that's what it takes.
I think that's true. I'll go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I guess we'd leave it at AG1 then, but AG1. Whatever the current zoning is in the county. But, I mean, yeah, it'd be nice to have more control, make it all part of the SOI, but the problem with that is going through LAFCO, we have to have a plan for it. And whatever we have, whatever land uses we have in our plan, then we have to be able to provide all the services that are required and so forth. And in order to apply and get that approved, you know, we can't just say, we just want to make it an SOI. That's why we would be laughed at.
You can do an SOI.
SOI, you can.
We wouldn't run any fiscal model on that line change for the SOI. There's nothing to analyze.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
certainly the notion of expanding the sphere for a buffer control could happen completely independently of what we're trying to do, and that could be a recommendation. But as far for the purposes of land uses to do the fiscal study, we would need to come up with something different than ag, and so what you put forward there is certainly a viable option.
Okay.
Sorry I didn't go through the chair, but we just...
Oh, that's fine. We're fluid.
Okay.
I'm stumped. Okay, so we want to make a motion To do what?
We're not here tonight to approve or deny the SOI.
Yes, you can.
No, that's not our purview. We can recommend that we make no changes.
I'll make a motion. I make a motion. It can die, but I'll make a motion that we deny these scenarios and that we open, if the city council wants to continue, that we have some public workshops prior to us trying to make this decision here without more input. I don't know how you make that motion. I make a motion to deny the 4 scenarios and that we kick it back to staff to have public workshops for more input on other scenarios or no scenarios.
Actually, I wrote that down as my next question, but can we continue and request a workshop? And what would that do to the feasibility study? I mean, I know it's funded and I know what we're supposed to be doing, but this expands the scope of the feasibility study contract, doesn't it?
Well, it would reduce the scope of the feasibility study if you reduce the potential annexations, because sphere of influence expansion alone doesn't require an analysis of zoning and all those types of things. So basically think of it as at this point you have free speech rights as between you and the city council. You can't hold it and keep it from going to the city council. This is your opportunity to make your suggestions to them either collectively or individually.
But, right, what if we don't want to recommend any land uses at this point, but we want to ask to have a workshop, a visioning workshop included before the feasibility study is completed?
That would be your recommendation, and then they would get all the materials that have been put together so far together with your recommendation and decide what to do. One thing I would talk about in terms of workshops is I think a lot of the concern is you'd want to have lots of workshops before you decided what you wanted to pursue in terms of sphere of influence, and certainly what you wanted to pursue in terms of annexation. At this point, the council is just trying to decide what to do a feasibility study on.
Yeah.
But couldn't we postpone the feasibility study process?
The council could.
Okay, so I'm going to make a motion that I move that we ask the council to postpone the sphere of influence and annexation study pending staff having additional input from the public and workshops.
I'll second it.
Do we have that writing?
Yeah.
Okay. And you'll repeat it one more time once you have written it.
You gotta be kidding. Make a motion that we postpone the sphere of influence and annexation study pending staff conducting workshops for additional public input regarding the annexation and sphere of influence. Yeah.
So you got that, Brenda? Okay. Do a roll call vote. Gay?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Jack?
Yes.
I vote no. Passes 3-1. Okay, that's tabled.
Can I just make a comment, though? Because what will happen, I'm not going to be cynical. What happens many times, and I've sat up here for years and on the BAR, is that folks come to the end result meetings and get angry and talk, and that's wonderful. But if we're having these public workshop inputs and people don't go, it will be the same result. And we'll sit here in 6 months and say, golly, we're back at scenarios 1, 2, 4, and people say, I never had a chance to give any input. And we're going to say, well, golly, we had these meetings. So please stay vigilant. Assuming City Council agrees to this, which they might not, please stay on board and involved, because it will be back here later and everyone will be angry again.
We'll bring Danish.
You should also go to the city council meeting when this comes up.
with suggestions instead of just criticisms.
You know, you should go to the city council meetings anyway, and if you can't go, it's on Comcast Channel 23, and it live streams. So you can watch it on your computer at home, because the city council had a lot of discussion about all of this, and this is where we are now in the process. The process has been going on for a while, and I'm sorry you all weren't following it. I know a lot of people were angry about that, but there was an opportunity. So stay engaged. Stay engaged with your city council.
Any other commissioners' comments? Planning director's comments?
No, sir.
Thank you. We'll be having a meeting next month?
Yes.
Yes? All right. At 8:50, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.